Okay, I'm back, and let me see if I still have my sharing here. Yes. All right. So I'm still looking at the who said what. As I said, the Muslim scholars gave three definitions of mind. The instinct. So we'll say one of the instinct's capabilities. It's one of the instinct capabilities of a human, or insan, which enables the understanding of context and realities. But this question, what is this capability? So it's one of the instinct's capabilities. It's a capability within the instinct, within the ghariza, is to be able to understand. And then, of course, what we are seeing, the understanding here, that's what my comment. Look, this is the result of thinking. When you understand an issue, so you thought about it, so something happened. So you made a thinking process that allowed you to understand. So what is that thinking? Still not defined here. As I said, the vision, they said it's a vision which is a power to prevent a human from evil actions. They said, okay, this is a power from within you that allows you to stay from the bad reactions, bad moralities, bad ethics. Stay away from, let's say, alcoholism, from drugs. That's something within you that pushes you to stay away from evil. Now, of course, this is derived from the linguistics meaning of aql. These scholars who did this, the word aql in Arabic means to contain or to restrict. So aql is that's what we say to have aql for a camel or a horse. Then you need to get the rope and to tie the ropes, tie that animal with a rope. So this is aql. So you stop this animal from moving around and getting in trouble. So they said this aql comes from there. Actually, this is just a very unfounded theory or statement. Some of them with the vision, they said it's an acts of good, which are not classified as part of the mind, and they did not, of course, answer what is the mind. Imam al-Muhtasibi, he mentioned, I think this is the same slide I was on. So al-Muhtasibi said it's an instinct. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal supports al-Muhtasibi and said, yes, it is instinct. Al-Juwayni, who is used to be called the Imam al-Haramain, it is the Imam of the Mecca and Medina, supports al-Muhtasibi also and says it is instinct. And he added it's a way to arrive at knowledge using primitives. And whenever you say primitives, it's logic. So the Al-Juwayni is supporting the concepts of logic, which was the most famous one during the early Islamic era, coming from the Greeks and the Romans. Qudama bin Ja'far, another scholar, he said mind is twofold. There are two things of the mind. One is a natural given, and the other is a structured. Structured means it's imported from outside, or it's something natural from within you, like instinct. And he focuses on the results of thinking rather than the results of thinking rather than the mind itself, okay, which is the process. Who else? Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, again, very prominent scholar, very well versed in the methodologies of Sufis and thinking activities. But still, when he talked about instinct, he said, again, it's an instinct. It's also, he said, it's a born knowledge, such as the ability of child to realize that number 2 is larger than number 1. He said that's, but did not arrive at the conclusion of the mind. And then he said the knowledge obtained through experience. So he included the experience here, which is, it's a good try. And then he says it's also a power developed and enhanced by instinct experiences. Again, that's what Muhtasibi said. Ibn al-Jawzi, another scholar, he said mind can be recognized by its outcome only. He said, I don't worry about the mind, I worry about always about what comes out of it. If you do something, produce something, bring a new idea, bring a new theory, a new invention, that is what is relevant. So I recognize the mind by its outcome rather than by its mechanism. And Nasfi, he says it's a power of self, which is a nafs called, which perceives external knowledge. True, but what is that power? He called it al-jawhar. This is something like very valuable. It's a nucleus. It's intrinsic to the human, which enables the perception of the unseen, al-ghayb. And this guy, al-Nasfi, he went all the way beyond even the ability of the mind. He says your ability to perceive what is the unseen. And that's absolutely far-fetched. Al-Razi, he said the mind is a tool rather than a method. He said it's a tool, just like the brain, which distinguishes humans from animals. But what is this tool? Yes, it's true, it's a facility, it is something that distinguishes me from the animals, but what is it that distinguishes? So he did not elaborate on this one. So let me go. Summary of Muslim definitions. No real definitions of mind. Provided opinions without evidence. Equate mind with the products of thinking. Methods and means of arriving at knowledge without defining what these methods. This is one of the best conclusion they came up with, but still this one, it's a method of arriving at knowledge, but what that method is. Attributes and power of thinking. Conclusion failed to provide a proper definition of what is mind, what is thinking, what is thought process, because these are synonyms. The others now, which are more recent, the theory of mind between Hegel versus Marx. Hegel is the father of idealism, father of capitalism, as I mentioned earlier. But Marx is the father of socialism and communism, and both have a quite opposite thought about what mind is. What Hegel said, it is the brain, it's the brain that reflects itself on a given material being. So the brain, with the power of the brain, so he included the brain, so he used the brain, he included the material to be the subject of thought, true, but what he mentioned, at the end of the day, this is something in the brain that reflects itself on a matter, and then from the matter comes back to the brain, so it becomes a cycle of production. And that's very vague definition, and it's not realistic at all. Besides, there is no reflection between the brain and the matter. Actually, one of the things when I used to argue with some of these people, I used to ask them, when the person is sleeping, does he still have the brain or does not? I said, of course he does. Does the brain sleep? I said, no, the brain does not sleep, but there is no interaction with the reality. I said, what prevents this brain from being reflected on a given matter? Let's say if an enemy comes in, or an animal, or maybe a snake sneaks into your house while you are sleeping, why your brain does not reflect and invokes that fear, which it should promote you to protect yourself from this dangerous position. Marx, on the contrary, he said, no, Hegel was wrong. It is the matter itself that gets reflected on the brain processes this reflection and then produces a result, and that is So the thinking to him and the mind is the reflection of the material being to the brain. And then the brain will take its internal processes to come up with a new thought. And that is, of course, it's a short-sighted definition, but at least both these guys included two major things, the brain and the matter, which is the subject of thought. But they ignored what I will call in a second the previous information and the ability to interconnect the information you have in the brain with the current subject of thought. Now, of course, this is the which I just explained. I'm not going to go through that process again, but in conclusion, the Hegel, who produced a very strong ideology, which is the idealism, and idealism, that's where democracy comes from, that's where capitalism comes from, that's where liberty comes from, that's where free, it's a very powerful idea, his product. But the methodology of thinking he used is short-sighted, and it's a failed attempt. He did not include the necessary information to explain the reality, and the brain neither reflects nor radiates knowledge. It does a process. There is something called a process within the brain, which needs to be understood. Now, what is this? Why this is not visible to me? And I'm pretty sure it's not visible to you either. Okay, I think this is better. So the reality, the impact, the reality, which is the matter, is explained and understood based on previous mindset, not information. And it generates biased conclusion because, and that's a very important conclusion here. Look, I am, let's say, I have some biases saying that German race is the best race and the most superior race in the world. Now, when I see a new type of people with a new color, with different language, and gets, as he said, reflected on the brain, or at least the brain will start processing that, will process the view of a new entity based on that knowledge he has already, convictions that eventually could have come from their instincts rather than from their knowledge. And that's what have resulted in lots of racism and discrimination in the world. That's just quick brief on that. Now, Marx, of course, he said that the matter reflects on the brain. It's a serious attempt, we say, but define two major components of mind only, which is the brain and the reality, did not include previous information. Actually, he insisted that you don't need information. Brain can produce thought from scratch, and that's absolutely wrong. You will never be able to produce any idea until and unless you have previous information related to the new reality that allows you to do the thought. And here again, let's see. So the reality is explained and understood based on its own characteristics, the characteristics of the matter, and he denies the existence of Allah as a base of theory. And actually, from my own studies and my own interactions with all of these communists, I figured out, and I think it's a valid conclusion, that these guys have previous stand and adherence to the idea that the world is godless, that there is no creator, the world is permanent, is eternal. And then based on that, they started developing this thought. It's not the other way around. It's not that they came to the conclusion that the world is without a creator. They had this eternality concept in their mind, and they started showing that the brain can act without the need of external information from the very beginning. So now, what's the reality of mind? This is the million-dollar question which you brothers and sisters have posed, and I need to finish with that. This was lecture 2 in my previous class, but now I will finish it here. Taqiyuddin Nabhani, who lived between 1909 and December 11, 1977, who's Islamic scholar from Jerusalem. Many of you know it. He's the founder of the Islamic political party called Hizb ut-Tahrir, and he has a main book called Quick Thinking. That's one, and the Quick Thinking, and he has, of course, other books that have to do with our current lecture, like the Islamic State, personality, also the political economy and policies of industrialization, and so on. There are many. So now the ideas that Nabhani came with, he said, look, the mind is not one entity. It's a component of several things. One is the brain itself, which is the tool, the senses that are necessary to realize what is the subject of thought, the reality, and the previous information that are needed to explain the reality. And all of this, there comes under, and that's what mind, and then the process of thinking with the mind is actually the correlation of the previous information, info, to the reality, which is sensed by the sensors. And this correlation of info to the reality should be carried by the brain, because you cannot do this correlation outside the brain. That's where the tool. So here, there are these components. So let me look at them here. These are components. They are the senses. You have the tongue, you have the skin, the nose, the eye, the ear. These are the sensors that bring the reality from outside. The reality, you see the tree, you can taste the food, you can feel the hardness of a matter, let's say the rock, you can smell the perfume, you can hear a sound. All this sound, all these are the realities outside. They are introduced into the brain, they are carried into the brain. So the brain is my tool through these senses. And that's what, if you try to do a thinking process on an object that is out of your senses, or outside the scope of the senses of a human, that's not a thinking immediately. It's not part of the mind. That's not the work of a mind. That could be imagination. That's why when it comes to ghaib, the unseen, so look, you cannot think about the unghaib, about the ghaib, about the unseen. You cannot, because number one, it could be a reality based on the knowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal told us. There are malaika, and there are jinn, and there is Jannah, there is Nar, which we could not sense it. All I know about it is information, which is, what is the information? Yeah, I need information. So let me go back here. So even if you tell me about something that you know of, but I could have information, but I don't have an ability to sense the reality, or no one has sensed that reality. Nobody had a sense. Nobody seen, heard, touched, smelled, or tasted a certain reality to send it to me. That's not a process of thought. It's just information. That information, I can use it, but I cannot produce a new thought with it. And that's the power here. So the mind will be able to produce a thought by, as I said, correlating. You give me an information, like info about Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner. Give me information on him. And is he real or is it fake? No, he's real. There are proofs, photos, videos, people who have seen him, interacted with him. So it's a real. And give me some information about him. So that reality called the Prigozhin, with the information you give me, my mind now starts processing that previous information and then come to the conclusion, which is a new thought. So the mind will be able to correlate. Correlate means establish a relationship. And here I want to mention the power or the functions of mind. I will add the functions of the brain. Sorry, not the mind. I started talking like the other people. So, functions of the brain. The brain has one function is to store raw data, store information, which is information. The difference between data and raw data and information is that information is a processed data. For example, in computer, we can send over the net data bytes, and these bytes are binary bits 0, 0, 1, 0. It's data. At some place, some location within the computer will convert that data into an image, so it becomes a photo, an image, or a video. So that's information. And then it can store the knowledge, which is the brain, once it starts relating, using this information in a certain manner, as we will speak about in mind, can produce a knowledge. But then it also can store it. Not only, so let's say today somebody, again, talks to me, asks me, what is this Prigozhin? What does he want? What is this Wagner itself? I say, okay, I did receive a paper, which is raw data, that brings the name of Prigozhin, what he looks like. I have some information that he was in Syria, he was in Sudan, that he was running a business for Putin. And then I'll say, oh, okay, then this Wagner must be a person who served Putin a lot, and eventually he rose up to become a challenge to Putin. Therefore, he had to be removed from power. So now this Prigozhin needs to be removed, and all of this event that took place eventually ended up his role in the Russian government. That's a knowledge. Now that's a knowledge. Could be correct, could be wrong. It's the knowledge I produced out of the information which came from data, which was sensed by my sensors, by my ear or by my eye. And then this knowledge, I can store it. So brain can store raw data, can store information, and store the knowledge, either produced by me or produced by someone else. I read a book, I remember it, I read the Quran, I memorize it. It's called memorization, it's storage. So it can. And then the other function the brain can retrieve information or retrieve stored elements, which is again data, info, knowledge. It can bring them back. Let's say, do you remember an ayah that talks about Fir'aun? Your brain starts functioning and remembers, it recollects, retrieves, store. This is what we call memory, or not memorization. Memorization is the first one. This is, and here is using or getting the, I think if I add any more words, will make it worse. Just retrieve, that's good. Bring out from your brain some information that you have previously stored. You cannot retrieve an information or data or knowledge which has not been stored in your brain, something that you have never heard of, and I ask you about it. I say, oh, do you know the name of person of that professor who taught me back 30 years ago when I was still studying some of these issues? Now, you never met me before. You've never heard who was my teacher. You don't have that data. You'll just say, I don't know. What does mean I don't know? You don't have the information in your brain stored previously. Now, if you start making something up, somebody asks you a question and you start making things up, that's not retrieving information. That is assuming, making people assume that you have that knowledge or that information. And as soon as this is discovered, you will be discredited. And the last one, the last function is the ability to correlate this, all of this, the data, to correlate this to a new reality. By reality, I mean subject of thought. There is a subject that you need to think about. Like the example I'm saying, oh, what is the status of Prigozhin? What data now, somebody told me Prigozhin. I read something about him. I was able to realize that this is an entity, a real entity, a person, Russian, that's a name. Then what is else related to him? He was the master of catering food for Putin, a multi-millionaire, came into existence. All of this now I start looking at the information which I have or I can use now, and also I use the knowledge I have and the previous information about the Russian people, their behavior, their way of dealing. Now with all of this now, I come to the conclusion that this person must be an opportunist who's trying to use an opportunity to replace Putin and be in his place. I can come up to this conclusion, and now this conclusion becomes a knowledge. It becomes in my brain. Then I use it one more time to say, okay, but why did he do whatever he did in the last 2 weeks? I say, now I'm using the knowledge which I produced myself to produce yet one more piece of knowledge, that his latest rebellion attempt was a way to save his skin after he found out that Putin wants to get rid of him. Okay, that's a conclusion. I could be right, I could be wrong, but it's a new piece of knowledge. So the brain has these three functionalities, and all of these functionalities are required in the process of thought. So you either have a previous information from the past, or you gain information now, you read and you get the data inside your brain and the knowledge, previous knowledge, and now you use this knowledge to explain to correlate it to a reality like a war, like a fight between two entities, like a rebellion, like a new production, like the GPT and the AI, which is being promoted heavily these days. So all of these become the components that make up my mind in general, and which includes a process. So mind is not an object. Mind actually is a process, because the object here is a brain. The object is a piece of information. The object is a reality that you want to pass a judgment on. Now, the mind is the process that collects all of these information with a reality, and the power of correlation, that is a function of the brain. It's a function. If you can train it as much as you can train your ability to store. Now, if I ask any of you, how long does it take you to memorize 10 ayah of the Quran? I will find that someone will tell me, oh, it takes me 10 minutes. Someone will say, oh, 20 minutes. I would say it takes me maybe 5 hours. Okay, why is the difference? Difference because these are functionalities of storing data in the brain, which I have trained. The one who makes 10 ayat in 10 minutes must have trained his brain or her brain to memorize. Now, assume that you stored the information, you memorized it. Then I will ask you the question, do you recall some of the data information which I know that you already know it? You say, just give me a second. It takes you a few seconds to get that data or knowledge from your brain. Some will immediately, in a spark, they will say, yes, this is the answer to your question, and I have that already in my brain. Some will probably forget it and remember it. Try to remember it means here to retrieve, and that's what I was saying. Remember, I want to remember this issue. After a couple of hours, you say, you know, you asked me about this phone number of this brother or sister. I got it now. You just were able to recollect it. And this can be trained. And this also the correlation, which means trying to relate a piece of information to a new reality. You have read maybe a complete, maybe 3-4 books on some issue. Now, which of this information or data is relevant to a current topic or current issue that I am asking about? It takes you, probably some people will take him few seconds, they can immediately find the proper information related to the subject being discussed. Some will probably try to use each and every piece of information you know about the subject, which most of them may be unrelated. And you have probably been in these stands where some people, you know, this guy is talking about everything. Nothing of them makes sense. He knows a lot, but cannot focus. That's the ability to correlate data and information to reality can be lacking. So this is what makes up the mind, and that's the answer to the question. Mind is not an entity. Mind is not a specific object that you can say this is mind. Mind is a process. Process of what? A process that allows you to produce a thought by correlating the data that is stored already in your brain, data, information, or knowledge, to a new reality that is, or to a reality in front of you, to produce a new thought for this. Now, if you use a thought that has been produced earlier by you or by someone else, it comes here in number 2. That's not thinking. That's retrieving information, retrieving knowledge, repeating knowledge. But to be able to produce a thought, once you ask, there is a thought. Now, the thought can be passing a judgment on a previously given idea. Somebody gave you an idea, let's say the Russian America is trying to contain Russia. That's a knowledge. Now, if your brain start correlating information on Russia and containment, and you come to the conclusion that this is partially true, it's containment on one side, but there is something yet more than containment. It is something trying to keep it out of the world arena. Maybe you can add something, or you will just say it's a correct idea or a wrong idea. That is a thought process. So anyway, so all of these issues here, these are the components of mind which we will be using today in the